Asodanandana Bhajanarandana Yamuna Kedavanachari Yamuna Kedavanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Jaya Gopidana Vallabha Girivaradhari Jaya Gopidana Vallabha Girivaradhari Asoranana Bhajanarandana Asoranandana Bhajanarandana Yamuna Kedavanachari Yamuna Kedavanachari Hare Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare Jaya Prabhupada Jaya Prabhupada Jaya Prabhupada Jaya Prabhupada 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 Jaya Jaya Prabhupada Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai, ISKCON Govardhana ki jai, Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai, guru-śiṣya-prayojanam. O glory assemble the devotees, O glory assemble the devotees, O glory assemble the devotees, O glory Shigavan Shigavanga. Reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 3, Chapter 7, Text 38. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Puruṣasya saṁsthānaṁ. Svarūpaṁ va parasya ca. Jñānaṁ ca naigamaṁ yatad. guru-śiṣya-prayojanam. puruṣasya saṁsthānaṁ. svarūpaṁ va parasya ca. jñānaṁ ca naigamaṁ yatad. guru-śiṣya-prayojanam. puruṣasya saṁsthānaṁ. svarūpaṁ va parasya. jñānaṁ ca naigamaṁ yatad. guru-śiṣya-prayojanam. Word for word, puruṣasya, of the living entity, cha, also, saṁsthānaṁ, existence, svarūpaṁ, identity, va, either or, parasya, of the supreme, cha, also, jñānaṁ, knowledge, cha, also, naigamaṁ, in the matter of the Upanishads, yat, that, tat, the same, guru, spiritual master, śiṣya, disciple, prayojanam, necessity. Translation, Prabhu Zangrisi, Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila What are the truths regarding the living entities and the Supreme Personality of Godhead? What are their identities? What are the specific values in the knowledge in the Vedas? And what are the necessities for the spiritual master and his disciples? So this is Vidura inquiring from Maitreya. So please repeat. What are the truths regarding the living entities? And the Supreme Personality of Godhead. What are their identities? What are the specific values in the knowledge in the Vedas? And what are the necessities for the spiritual master and his disciples? Report by Srila Prabhupada. The living entities are constitutionally servitors of the Lord, who can accept all kinds of service from everyone. It is clearly declared in Bhagavad Gita 5.29 that the Lord is the supreme enjoyer of the benefits of all sacrifices and penances, the proprietor of all that is manifested, and the friend of all living entities. That is his real identity. Therefore, when the living entity accepts the supreme proprietorship of the Lord and acts in that attitude, he resumes his real identity. In order to elevate the living entity to this standard of knowledge, there is the necessity of spiritual association. The bona fide spiritual master desires that his disciples know the process of rendering transcendental service to the Lord, and the disciples also know that they have to learn about the eternal relationship between God and the living entity from a self-realized soul. To disseminate transcendental knowledge, one must retire from mundane activities on the strength of enlightenment in knowledge in terms of Vedic wisdom. That is the sum and substance of all the questions in this verse. So we heard previous classes that Vidura is presenting around about 40 different questions to Vidura. And Krishna Kirtan Prabhu mentioned the other day that if we were throwing 40 questions at us, we might remember the first one, but we'd forget all the others. So obviously these are not ordinary personalities that we're hearing about. Sometimes it's described that one who has photographic memory is known as a Shrutidara, that you hear once and you never forget. So we could say that Maitreya is in this category. He's hearing, and for the next many chapters, he's going to be responding to these questions. So also we know, for instance, Sutta Goswami was Shrutidara. He was present when Sukadeva Goswami was reciting Srimad Bhagavatam to Maharaj Parikshit, and later he himself recited that same Srimad Bhagavatam to the sages in Namashranya. So just from memory, 18,000 verses he was able to recall and repeat to the sages. In more recent history, who else is known as Shrutidara? Is Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati. He's sometimes is known as the walking encyclopedia. I mentioned in his biography that when he was at school, he actually read every book in the library, and he could quote from them as well. Basically, he knew more than the teachers. But he just had that quality. He'd hear once and then remember. So extraordinary quality that some of these devotees possess. So the guru is obviously desiring, is the well-wisher for the disciples. So he's desiring to know the process of rendering transcendental devotional service. So of course, devotional service, the prime ingredient of devotional service is obviously serving Krishna with love, the bhakti yoga. If there is love there, it can be considered devotional service of one degree or another. And how a disciple may serve the spiritual master is basically unlimited in so many different ways. Serving the spiritual master, serving Krishna, unlimited different ways. However, Prahlad Maharaj, he does specifically broadly categorize them into 9 different categories. In the 7th canto, chapter 5, verse 23, Prahlad Maharaj mentions this. So I'm sure we're all familiar with this, but it begins with Shravanam. What does Shravanam mean? Hearing. So who was the ideal personality presented as one who perfect themselves through hearing? Maharaj Parikshit, very good. So in the last 7 days of his life, he was completely absorbed in hearing Srimad Bhagavatam from Sukadeva Goswami. Of course, after being cursed by the Brahmana boy Shringi to die in 7 days from a snake bite, he was asking his Brahmanas, advisors, so what should I do? What is the duty of a person who is about to die? And so there was little consensus. Nobody could really come up with a solid advice or conclusion. So at that point, by divine arrangement, Sukadeva Goswami arrived. And so for the next 7 days, Maharaj Parikshit was simply hearing Bhagavatam. So it was considered that's the ideal activity for one. Of course, not one about to die, but at any point. So sometimes in India we had this called Bhagavat Shabda. Prabhupada was very critical of this. There's somebody imitating Sukadeva Goswami would recite Bhagavatam for 7 days, but generally they'd go straight to the 10th canto, but not starting from the beginning. So it's like a cheap imitation. But nevertheless, Maharaj Parikshit for 7 days. He perfected himself through hearing. So number 2, Kirtanam, we all know, is chanting. So who perfected themselves? Ideal example for chanting? Sukadeva Goswami. Very good. So obviously Maharaj Parikshit was hearing, Sukadeva Goswami was speaking. So Sukadeva Goswami, there's a whole history there, but basically he was the son of Vyasadeva, Srila Vyasadeva, and whilst Sukadeva Goswami was in the womb of Vyasadeva's mother, he was hearing the Srimad Bhagavatam spoken by his father, and becomes self-realised in that way within the womb. Number 3, Vishnu Smaranam is... No, but what Vishnu Smaranam means? Remembering. Very good. You have to share some of the answers around, you know. Okay, so remembering. So who was the ideal example for remembering? Prahlad Maharaj. Very good. Yeah. So of course we know Prahlad Maharaj was the son of Hiranyakasipu, and Hiranyakasipu become frightened was the word, or very threatened, maybe threatened, that that Prahlad Maharaj, everybody else had fear for him, Hiranyakasipu, but Prahlad Maharaj was showing no fear. And he said, "Where do you get your power from?" And Prahlad Maharaj said, "Same place you get your power from. It comes from Vishnu." Anyway, we know the story, but eventually Hiranyakasipu wanted to kill Prahlad Maharaj because he was simply speaking about the glories of Vishnu, who was his sworn enemy. And so in so many different ways he tried to kill Prahlad. But Prahlad, he was simply remembering Vishnu's lotus feet, never forgetting him, and in that way he achieved perfection. Ultimately, Hiranyakasipu was killed, liberated by Lord Nrsimhadev. So number 4, Padasevanam means... Padasevanam... Worshipping the lotus feet. Very good. And so who's the ideal example presented for that? Lakshmi Devi. The picture we generally see, Lakshmi Devi is eternally absorbed in massaging Lord Vishnu's lotus feet while floating on the in Swetadweep. So, some people, you get different, yoga groups and a lot of sort of, in the Hindu tradition, they sometimes, even I've seen like New Age sort of groups, they get very eager to worship Lakshmi on Lakshmi Puja. They think it's a very, cool thing to do or whatever, but the problem is simply worshipping Lakshmi. Lakshmi is also known as Chanchala, which means flickering. So Lakshmi, she can bestow wealth, but very easily she can take it away also. So the ideal way to worship or respect Lakshmi is to worship her husband Narayan or Vishnu. So because Lakshmi, she never leaves the lotus feet of a husband. So if you're worshipping a husband, automatically Lakshmi is going to be there. So that's the ideal way. Following the example of Lakshmi Devi is always worshipping the lotus feet of the Lord. So worshipping the lotus feet, of course, means just worshipping service, offering service to Krishna in so many different ways, but particularly worshipping the lotus feet. Chanting the holy name is encompasses all these different activities. So number 5, archanam, is deity worship. Very good. And so who's the ideal example for deity worship given Bhagavatam? Yes?
Maharaj Ambarish?
No. Yeah. Is Prithu, Maharaj Prithu. So he has mentioned that every sense of his body was engaged in that deity worship. He would use his legs to walk to the temple to worship the Lord. He would use his arms to worship the deity form, the Lord. He would use his eyes to see the beauty of the Lord, and the ears to hear his holy name, nose to smell the incense and the flowers. And I mentioned even his whole body was used by touching the body of other devotees engaged in worship. So Maharaj Prishad, he's a Shaktavaisha avatar. There's a whole history there, but he's given given as the ideal example that used all his possessions in worshipping the Lord. So number 6, vandanam. Vandanam means praying. Very good. So the ideal example presented as perfecting themselves through prayer. So who did Kamsa send to Vrindavan to collect Krishna? Akrura. Yes, Akrura. So when Akrura went with his chariot to pick up Krishna to bring them back for the wrestling match, so when he's in the outskirts of Vrindavan, he saw Krishna's lotus footprints in the ground, and he immediately got down from the chariot and paid his obeisances and touched the footprints and offered so many nice prayers, basically thinking how fortunate he was that he was able to see Krishna's lotus feet and to render service to him. Of course, it's interesting that Kamsa, he revealed to Akrura all these demoniac plans. He was going to kill all the kings and, so many people, and then basically, be the supreme ruler. So Akrura, because he was a devotee of Krishna, and hearing that, Kamsa is going to kill Krishna and Balaram, of course Akrura knew nobody could do that. But nevertheless, as the king, he was ordered to go and pick up Krishna and Balaram to bring back for the wrestling match. So he thought, he was thinking it was a great opportunity to render service, to actually see personally Krishna and Balaram. So in that way, those very deep, meaningful prayers that he offered, he was considered, he's the ideal example of that. And number 7, dashyam means is servitorship. Yes, and the ideal example, Hanumanji. Yes. So Hanuman was he's the eternal servant of Ramachandra. In so many ways, he served Ramachandra to try to get Sita back and defeat Ravan and his army. So number 8, Sakhyam means friendship. Yes, ideal example for a friend. Arjuna. Yes. So Arjuna was the intimate friend of Krishna, and in so many ways. And Krishna was, there was such a close bond that when Arjuna asked Krishna to become his chariot driver, generally a chariot driver is, it's like almost like a menial activity in one sense. But Krishna indebted with the friendship and the devotion of his friend, he accepted the role of chariot driver. So Krishna as the chariot driver, the Sanskrit name for that? Do we know? No. We've got a Mataji, the same name on the farm. Parasya. So Pata is Arjuna, Sarati, chariot driver. So when Krishna takes that role of driving the chariot, he becomes known as Parasya. And number 9, Atma Nivedanam means complete surrender. Very good. You've got most of them. You're doing well. Yeah. So ideal example of one who surrendered completely? Bali Maharaj. Yes. So it's actually interesting. Many years ago, Maharaj in Indradu Maharaj in Sydney there was an initiation yagna. He was giving names to some of his new disciples, and there was one devotee who somehow or other he'd brought a lottery ticket, and he promised Radha Gopinath that if he won, he would give the money to the deities. So it wasn't actually a lottery ticket. It was like some sort of charity that if you got first prize, you get a big house in the Gold Coast, which is worth $1 million. So he thought if he'd win, he'd sell it and give the money to Radha Gopinath. So anyway, when he was getting initiated, and Indradu Maharaj gave him a name. I forget what the name was, but Atmaram Prabhu, the TP, then said, actually, we've already got a devotee in the temple the same name. And Indradu Maharaj thought, oh, okay, I'll name you Atma Nivedanam because you're willing to give everything to the deities. Like that. So anyway, that's just a side story. But Atma Nivedanam. So Bali Maharaj, of course, Krishna appeared as Vamanadev to trick Maharaj Bali out of all his possessions. But because Bali Maharaj, he basically surrendered everything despite his spiritual master advising against that. But because Bali Maharaj surrendered everything, he's considered the ideal example. And Vamanadev, or in the form of Lord Vishnu, he agreed to become his gatekeeper. So in so many different ways, Krishna in different forms reciprocating with his devotees in that way. So Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, he specifically gives an explanation of this word shravanam. Of course, we know hearing and chanting, shravanam, kirtanam, are probably the basis of everything that we do. We're chanting and we're hearing. Everything else sort of revolves around this hearing and chanting process. So Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati says, the word shravanam refers to giving oral reception to the holy name and descriptions of the Lord's form, qualities, entourage and pastimes as explained in Srimad Bhagavatam, Bhagavad Gita and similar authorized scriptures. After orally receiving such messages, one should memorize these vibrations and repeat them, kirtanam. So whether it's chanting holy names like in kirtan, the leader is chanting and the audience is hearing and then it's repeated, or whether speaking Bhagavatam or Bhagavad Gita or any of the books supporting the Vedic version, is hearing and chanting is going on. So this is the whole basis. And in the end, we have different rules and regulations, but they ultimately culminate in two. Always remember Krishna and never forgetting him. So by this constant hearing and chanting, we can consider that the whole morning program is based on this principle, hearing and chanting in so many different ways. So also on the point of performing devotional service. But there's different levels of devotional service, but ideally pure devotional service, Rupa Goswami mentions in Nectar Devotion, he gives the qualification what actually is devotional service. So this verse, which I'm sure you're familiar with, Anya Bilasita Sunyam, Gana Kamani Anavritam, Anukoyena Krishnanu, Silanam Bhakti Uttamam. So qualification devotional service, that one should render transcendental loving service to the Supreme Lord Krishna favourably and without desire for material profit or gain through fruitive activity or philosophical speculation. That is called pure devotional service. So one should simply satisfy Krishna without being influenced by fruitive knowledge or fruitive activity. So this point that favourably is presented, that can you perform devotional service unfavourably? So the example is sometimes given as Ravana or Kamsa, that they were constantly absorbed in thought of Vishnu or Krishna, but the desire to kill him, defeat him, to kill him. So even though they're absorbed in thinking, that was considered unfavourably, but nevertheless they did get, they were liberated as a result. Of course, anybody who's killed by Krishna or Vishnu, in that way he's known as Mukunda, one who gives liberation. So, but nevertheless, ideally, transcendental devotional service should be performed favourably. And favourably means with love. If love is there, that's the most important ingredient. In this purport, Prabhupada does mention this Bhagavad Gita verse 529. It is clearly declared in 529 that the Lord is supreme enjoyer of the benefits of all sacrifice and penances, etc. So in the purport to that verse 529, does anyone remember what Prabhupada, he calls that verse, he gives that verse a particular title. Anyone remember what that is? So,
because of the peace formula.
Peace formula, very good. So that verse, Bhaktaram Yagna Tapashyam Savaloka Mahesram Surudam Savabhutanam Jnānaṁ Mam Svantam Richati. So it says, a person in full consciousness of me, this is Krishna speaking to Arjuna, full consciousness of me, knowing me to be the ultimate beneficiary of all sacrifices and austerities, the Supreme Lord of all planets and demigods, and the benefactor and well-wisher of all living entities, attains peace from the pangs of material miseries. So Prabhupada calls this the peace formula, of course, for the individual. If one accepts Krishna in that situation, they can attain peace from pangs and material miseries. But as collectively, the whole society, if we were to accept Krishna in that particular category, society can become peaceful, rather than everybody thinking they're the Lord of all they can survey, and everybody's competing to be number one. If everybody accepts that Krishna is in the centre, then the society could become very peaceful. Unfortunately, that's not happening at the moment. But nevertheless, the principle is there that become peaceful if we accept Krishna in the centre. And in the purport also, Prabhupada mentions that the bona fide spiritual master desires that his disciples know the process of rendering transcendental service, and the disciples also know that they have to learn about the eternal relationship between God and the living entity from a self-realized soul. So Prabhupada, he basically formed this ISKCON movement to achieve these different goals, and particularly he's presented the 7 purposes of ISKCON. So number 1 was to systematically propagate spiritual knowledge to society at large and to educate all people in the techniques of spiritual life. So the whole arrangement of the society, of the institution, is basically, in Prabhupada stressed, book distribution, but not just distribute books, to read and study. And also, so this is also part of Shravanam Kirtanam, that we're reading books and then we're sharing the knowledge with others. And he mentions to propagate a consciousness of Krishna, as revealed in Bhagavad Gita, Bhagavatam, bring the members of society together so we have a spiritual association, teach and encourage the spreading the Saṁsthānaṁ movement, to erect different temples, places that we can come together to chant and hear about Krishna, teaching a simpler, more natural way of life. So these are different purposes. But once again, it all comes down to this Shravanam Kirtanam, that this is the basis of everything we do. When devotees come together, automatically there's going to be, hearing and chanting in so many different ways. So in the particular verse, Vidura is asking truths regarding living entity and the Supreme Personality of Godhead. What are their identities, specific values in the knowledge of the Vedas, and what are the necessities for spiritual master and disciples? These sort of topics could be spoken on for, unlimited periods of time, because there's so much involved. But Prabhupada, just in a few brief sentences, he basically gives a summary of these different topics. So he ends the purport by, that is the sum and substance of all the questions in these verses. So it could be fleshed out more and more, but this is like a bit of a summary of the understanding of the questions that Vidura is presenting. So perhaps we'll end there if there's any questions or comments at all. Yes?
All those different qualities from those different great personalities, if we want that quality, should we pray to that personality?
No harm in doing that. Yeah, it's mentioned that one should follow in the footsteps of a resident of Vrindavan, specifically. Following the footsteps of Lord Chaitanya, we're trying to, follow the example of the gopis. So they're obviously the ideal, the supreme example of residents of Vrindavan. So, of course, we have to remember Prabhupada is also a resident of Vrindavan, so following his example, we can also achieve perfection. Yeah, but prayers to these great souls, will always be beneficial.
Sometimes you hear that if you just pray to Krishna, everything else comes in place. So I'm just wondering, should we just be praying to Prabhupada, to Krishna?
Yeah, it depends. Somebody might have a particular, there's a personality that really resonates with them, their particular example or mood, like that. So, praying to Krishna, praying to the devotee is non-different. It's exactly the same. And sometimes it's said, Krishna said, you serve my devotee, that's more pleasing to me than serving myself, so.
I've heard that Hanuman is still on this planet, is that right?
I haven't seen him, but he could be.
So then I'm thinking, if we're praying to Hanuman, then we didn't really achieve he does a lot of service, he's known for service,
Yeah.
but ultimately we want to be back in the spiritual world, right?
Yeah, well, Hanuman is the eternal servant. He'll go wherever Ram wants him. We know in Mahabharata he pops up different places. He benedicts Bhima in the forthcoming, battle of Kurukshetra. He'll help him, give him extra strength. He was on the flag of Arjuna's chariot, giving so many, encouragement. So he'll go wherever Ram wants him to, So, you know, I mean, worshipping Hanuman is worshipping, you know, Ram's devotee. So that's as good as worshipping Ram or Krishna also.
Would Hanuman be here because he's stuck here, or because he's so into service and we need to service, or we need to
Well, I wouldn't use the word stuck. But like I said, he'll go wherever Ram wants him to. Yes.
How do we differentiate between that offence of not worshipping demigods like Lord Shiva or Brahma, but they're also devotees, and so it's a compliment to worship the devotee of this like
Yeah, well, it's not so much worshipping them, it's more offering respect. You know, we offer respect that they're also devotees. But like Shiva himself, he tells his wife that the topmost worship is worship of Vishnu. And even above that is worshipping the devotees of Vishnu. So we can understand the demigods become pleased when we're also worshipping their master, Vishnu or Krishna. But we don't worship them thinking they are the supreme or equal to the supreme. So we can offer respects that they're also devotees. Yes, pardon.
So actually, the thing about that is, to consider Lord Brahma and Lord Shiva to be equal to Vishnu. That is the offense.
Yeah.
And the other thing, the reason why that has to be mentioned is because in India, that is the case. They consider Vishnu to be on the level of Brahma and Shiva. And therefore they're like, okay, so now we have three gods. They don't worship Lord Shiva and Lord Brahma as a devotee, which they are. And it actually offends Lord Shiva himself to be worshipped on the level. And he doesn't want that. And they worship the demigods for material gains.
That's correct.
And that's what takes it, they just further entangles them. And because Lord Shiva is very easily pleased, Ashutosh. So if you want a quick gain, worship him. And you can do that for devotional service. You can beg to him, Lord Shiva, for more service of the Vaishnavas, more mercy of Lord Nityananda. And he's so easily pleased, he will give it.
No, it's like Bhubaneswara. That area is considered one of Shiva's special dhams. And so some people are thinking that, special mercy of Shiva. But it's mentioned that if you leave your body in that dham, that Bhubaneswara, and you're not chanting Krishna's names, Shiva will appear and chant Krishna's names into your ear. So, in that sense, Shiva is helping, jivas to go back to Krishna also. So, it's just a matter of, Krishna, he talks about worshipping demigods in Bhagavad Gita, how to do it and etc., etc. But in the end, he said those who do it are less intelligent, because the benefit that they're giving has to come from Krishna anyway. So it's like, in a material sense, you're trying to bribe a cabinet minister for something. Instead of going to the prime minister, you're giving some bakshish to a cabinet minister, for some black market benefit.
When there
or
is a
something.
clear path to the Prime Minister, there is a clear path, but instead you're taking the...
That's it. So you can use that as analogy. Anything else? Thank you very much. Bye-bye.